John, we have a Hall of Famer, at least as of this coming Saturday, a Hall of Famer. Mets broadcaster Gary Cohen's going in, but before he's stopping by with us.
Yeah, it's terrific that we're going to have Gary on. I mean, there aren't that many people I would name who I'd say are absolutely excellent at the job that they do. And I think everybody would agree that he is an excellent play-by-play man for the Mets. And I'm interested in hearing about his background and how he transitioned from radio and TV. And of course, asking him about the current team.
You know, John, you're so absolutely excellent at your job that besides having Gary on the show, I was gone last week, literally out of the country. I'm going to ask you a bunch of questions. So we'll have Gary, those questions about what happened in the last week in Major League Baseball in the first third of the season. That's if you stick with us on the show with Joel Sherman and John Heyman. John, we didn't have a podcast last week because I was away. I was on across the pond, as they like to say. I saw Bruce Springsteen in Rome. I stopped in Greece for a few days. So I've got to do what I've been doing for 30 plus years, which is leaning on you for insight and expertise. I was speed watching games early in the morning there because I was asleep when the games were being played. But I left. I come back, it's a third of the season. As we're speaking, I believe the Mets are 500. And I just kept having this thought. Are the Mets good?
Yeah, I wonder about that. First of all, I'm jealous. I've seen Bruce Springsteen, but only in New Jersey and only in the 80s. So you're way ahead of me. Congratulations for that.
Circus Maximus in Rome, 80,000 people. And we were close to the stage. It was really quite a thing.
Getting onto the Mets, they're not good right now. I mean, look, they're 500, and that's what they should be. They have really not been impressive to this point. Obviously, the Diaz injury was a big blow. I'm worried about their bullpen. They have really three pieces there that they can rely on. I'm worried about the rotation. There's an age question there, and the offense has underperformed to this point. I do think, as our producer, Jake, thinks, Vientos needs to play every day at 1,100 OPS in the minors. I understand big difference between the minors and the majors. I think Tatis had like a 1,600 OPS when he was in the minors briefly. I get it. But, I mean, Vogelbach is a guy who walks and then he clogs the bases. That's on a good day. So Vientos needs to be playing. I'm not sure that's going to make the difference, but I am worried about the Mets.
You know why I'm worried, John? At some point, they're going to have to run something off. Win 20 or 30, et cetera. If they, the National League's going to be forgiving. And as we're speaking, there's only 6 teams over 500. The Mets are 500. So they're in contact with this. If they could run off a streak, they could put themselves in good situation. But I just keep watching them and saying, what are they good at? Like, it's not like last year where they hit well. They don't really hit for power much beyond Alonso and now a little bit Francisco Alvarez. The starting rotation has been one of the worst in the sport, though they have the 2 highest paid players per year in that rotation. They haven't been as good. McGill and Peterson took steps back instead of steps forward. Carrasco's been injured. Quintana's been injured. It's just, and the bullpen, like the Diaz loss is significant. You made this point. I want to give you credit for it. Is before we went on the air today, you said, wow, it would have been really something to have Robertson setting up Diaz. Instead, you have Robertson and then just a ton of questions, even Ottavino and Drew Smith, who they were counting on, and Brooks Raley, who they were counting on big time. And I just sit there and go, like, how would they run off 8 of 10, 12 of 15, 15 to 20? Like, what are they good at?
Well, individually, they've had, good spots. I mean, Alonso hits the home runs. Lindor plays a great shortstop. Alvarez has been good overall, better than expected catching, and he's hit home runs. So he's been very good. Nemo's been good. Robertson has been great. There's 4 or 5 guys you can name who've done really well or done parts that are really well. But overall, you're right. They have not been great at any one thing as a team.
John, if we switch to the other New York team, they're as we're speaking, they're 10 over 500. They have the 4th best record in the American League. And the AL East, that puts you in 3rd place. All 5 teams are over 500 still, a quarter of the way through the season, a third of the way through the season, I'm sorry. And I just keep having this thing is like, are the Yankees just addicted to winning? Because I watch them also, and I'm like, they're not playing that great. They obviously have the best everyday player in the game, positional player in the game in Judge, and it feels again like he carries them. But I watched them. They're worse on the bases than they were last year. They're worse in the field than they were last year. Their bullpen isn't as deep as it was last year. Their rotation isn't as deep. And somehow they're just addicted to winning. They're 10 over 500 again. Are the Yankees good?
Yes, I do think they are good. I mean, obviously, Judge is amazing. He's the best hitter in baseball. I mean, when you throw the power in there, I mean, you might say Freeman might get an 8 as a hitter, but if you count power hitting, I don't think anybody's better than Judge as a hitter, and I don't think there's any position player all around better than Judge. That's a big advantage to have him. I do think they're a good team. I think they'll be better once they get everyone together. There's a worry now about Bader. Is he going to be out a while at this point again? Stanton is going to be back. Trevino's going to be back. I think we're going to see Rodon at some point fairly, I don't want to say soon, but within a few weeks, I think. So, I mean, they're missing a lot of pieces and playing well. One thing I didn't mention about the Mets, you briefly touched on, they're only a half game out of the playoffs as we do this, right? One game over is a playoff team in the National League. So, I still think they can get in the playoffs, but your original question is, are they good? They're not good.
Well, the National League is bad. So it's going to be forgiven, right? The Cardinals have the second worst record in the National League and are closer to first place than the Yankees, who have the fourth best record in the whole league. It's reflective of how good Tampa's been, but also reflective of how bad the National League has been. But just flipping back to the Yankees, you mentioned, Bader might be looking at a second injured list stint this season. He never stays healthy. Stanton never stays healthy. Rodon never stays healthy. It's just like, the Yankees keep talking about this magical day when they're healthy. And I'm like, 3 guys will come back and 3 more will be out. You've signed and acquired a lot of injury-prone players. Again, there's something about them. They know it. They're very different from the Mets in this way, John. Right. They just know how to win. Like
it's a cycle, though. Right now, a lot of guys are out and they're still winning. Presumably they'll be back.
But when they're back, who else will be out? That's the thing I keep going for.
It looks like Bader might be out a little while now. And
John, I think what Giancarlo Stanton leads the major leagues in is being close to going out on a rehab assignment. I think he leads the league in that every year. He's very close to going out on a rehab assignment. And, like the moment someone like him or Severino comes back, just to me, the clock starts for the next time they're going to be out.
Well, Severino's been good, though. I mean,
2 starts because he hasn't pitched all year. Like if I were your graded odds, your math was, I've been leaning on that for 30 years. Also, is like, you think he'll make 10 uninterrupted starts? Like, what would be the odds?
Well, I'm an optimist. I think he will. He's looked great, so that's a big plus. Obviously, Cole has not been as good in the last 5 starts as he was in the first 7, but he's an ace. I feel good about this team. They're in a very tough division. They're well over 500 while injured. Judge is doing what he did last year. Rizzo, I think the banning of the shift has helped him, so he's going to be an even better player, and he's a really good player to begin with. I still believe in Volpe. I understand some people are wondering now because his average is around 200. I like the way he goes about it. I think he's going to be good. I like this team, and I have faith in this team. Now, unlike the Mets, their competition is quite good. I mean, even the Braves are backing up in the National League. In the American League, you've got the Rays, the best team. The Orioles are right up there. I mean, I think the Red Sox are going to come down, and they'll be the last place team. But the Blue Jays, there's no reason they should be anywhere near 500, right? I mean, they're like 10th in pitching, 11th in hitting. That should be well above 500. That should be a good team as well. So I think their biggest issue beyond the injuries is the competition, but they are a good team.
Yeah, so let's wrap up. I'll ask a third thing that I was thinking a lot about while I was gone. To the Yankees' credit, only 5 teams that were in the playoffs last year would be in the playoffs if the season ended today. A third of the way through. Tampa Bay, the Yankees, Astros, Braves, and Dodgers. That means 7 teams from last year are not in the playoffs. I'm going to go. Toronto's 1, Cleveland, Seattle, the Mets, Philadelphia, St. Louis, and San Diego. I just wonder what you think of those 7 teams. Let's not do them all, but just do you think there's a team in there? The Phillies are in there. This is where the Phillies were last year, and they ended up winning the National League Championship. When I read those 7 teams, who do you imagine kind of comes out of this kind of, quicksand and actually makes a strong run this year?
Well, I would certainly think that the Padres got to be better than this, right? I mean, not just because they were my World Series pick. Look at the talent on that team. I mean, I know Machado's out now, but we just saw them at Yankee Stadium. They have terrific, terrific talent. They should be much, much better. And I would think the Phillies would be better. I don't know whether it's the World Series hangover, WBC. Trey Turner just has not been what you expect. I mean, he's been a consistent force in baseball for years, and he has not done it. Those are the 2 teams that stand out. They have the same benefit the Mets have in the National League. Competition is not great, and I got to feel the Phillies and the Padres make a run. Those are the 2 teams I would pick out of that list. The Cardinals have the extra benefit, not only in the National League, they're in the National League Central. So I could easily see them winning that division. I don't know. They've been even worse than the other 2 though at this point. Yeah. It's amazing. On my post video, I picked the most disappointing team of the week, and it's been so easy. Every week we have somebody so disappointing. Whether it's the Blue Jays, or the Padres, Phillies, the Mets. It's amazing how bad some of these good teams are.
John, one of the things I think about a lot, you talked about the top level talent with the Padres, and I think the Padres, Mets, and Phillies all fall into this, and we all are seduced when teams sign stars. But baseball is our most democratic sport. In general, the 9th place hitter hits as often as the 3rd place hitter. The number 4 and 5 starter have to start as often as the first starter. The way bullpens are used now, you can't just say we have a bunch of mop-up guys out there. 7, 8 guys are going to get used a lot, often in leverage to high leverage situations. And you've got to have a good 1 to 26. You got to have a good 1 to 40. You had to do a good job with non-roster invitee major league guys in the offseason. Again, let's give the Yankees credit. Before he got hurt, Ian Hamilton was that kind of guy. They found on the margins. He was helping them a lot before he got hurt. And the Mets, the Phillies, and Padres are very top-heavy teams. And the season exposes that because of the way the game is distributed democratically, and because of the grind, how much the injury list is used, you need the length of your roster. And I just wonder about the length of the roster of all those teams.
I think the Padres should have some length. I mean, look how good Carpenter was last year. Now, I had to clean up at Yankee Stadium the other day when I was there, and he has not done anything. I feel like their complementary players are decent. They're good enough. Look, someone could say the Yankees are top heavy, right? They have 2 great players. They have Cole and they have Judge, and that's good enough for them. Maybe their depth is a little better than the Phillies and the Padres, but I don't see it. I really don't. I really believe that the Padres you have 5 or 6 superstars. You should be a good team, right? I mean, the other 20 guys or 21 guys can't be that bad, can they?
But this has been the Trout Angel thing for a couple of years, right? You have Trout, Ohtani.
They don't have 5 or 6.
Right.
The Padres have 5 superstars. The Phillies, I haven't counted, but it's close to that as well. The Angels really had those 2 players. Their depth fell off fairly quickly because Rendon is always hurt. So I would think with 5 superstars, you should be good. I might be proven wrong because they have not. Padres have been terrible. They've not just been mediocre. They've been bad.
John, I actually agree with you. I think the Yankees are very top heavy, and I think the secret sauce of the Rays is that no matter who they lose, the fall off to the next player is not that great, and they think of their roster for financial reasons 40-1 instead of 1-40. And they never put a player on the field pretty much who stinks. And these other teams do. The Padres, the Phillies, the Yankees, the Mets. I mean, without insulting anyone, I'm sure you and I, if we were sitting next to each other, we'd be like, how the hell is this guy in the major leagues? And they're playing on teams with $250+ million payrolls. So, those top heavy teams do distribute a lot of innings pitched and at bats to guys who are just not major league quality.
Yeah, the Rays have like 10 guys who have well above average stats at this point. So it's pretty amazing. You look at their bench, they usually have 3 or 4 guys who could easily be starting players. So give them credit. I wonder about the attrition of that team, though, because they, I know a lot of teams are getting injured, and pitching injuries are a bit up. They're not up as much as we think, but if you look at the stats, they are generally up a little bit. But boy, the Rays suffer a lot of pitching injuries. I just wonder how long they can keep going. I know they have great depth; they do a great job, and I know I've been a Rays detractor, and I've been 100% wrong, but they seem to have too many pitching injuries to me. I think ultimately that may do them in.
Well, we got 2/3 of the season to find out about all those clubs. What we're going to do next is the Mets are having their Hall of Fame induction on Saturday. Gary Cohen, the SNY play-by-play man, is deservedly going in, and he was kind enough to join us. He's kind enough to join us next on the show with Joel Sherman and John Heyman. Back on the show with Joel Sherman and John Heyman. And I feel it's weird for me to be introducing you, Gary Cohen. It's akin to me probably pinch hitting for Pete Alonso tonight. Feels backward for sure. But here we are. It's a special week for the Mets and for you. You're one of the 4 people going into the Mets Hall of Fame this weekend with your former radio partner, Howie Rose, and also with the players, Leiter and Howard Johnson. If people actually need the biography, you've been associated with Met broadcast since 1989, about half of that doing radio with Howie and Bob Murphy, and on TV since 2006 with the famous trio, Gary, Keith, and Ron. And so, first of all, congratulations. Thank you for joining us. And I just wonder if we could frame the issue a little bit, Gary. It's you're going into the Hall of Fame of the team you rooted for growing up in Queens, for the job you always hoped you would get. I wonder if you could put into words what this means. It's usually the end of career thing, but you're still at the top of your game.
Well, it is kind of hard to describe, and I'm really having trouble wrapping my brain around the whole thing. I still sometimes marvel at the fact that I even have this job, much less that I've spent more than half my life doing it. I really don't know how it's going to feel going out on that field and receiving this incredible honor in front of 40,000 people. It's really hard to describe. And, the fact that there are only a few dozen people in the Mets Hall of Fame and that I'm going to be one of them, you have to understand that the Mets were my life as a kid, and they've become my life as an adult. And to be in that small fraternity is just mind-boggling to me.
Gary, congratulations. Well deserved. I think you guys have the best broadcast trio going in baseball. So my hat's off to you for that. You mentioned how the Mets were your life as a kid. You did go to Columbia, so I'm assuming you found some time for studying as well. But I didn't realize you were from Kew Gardens. That's pretty close. I just want to know a little bit more about your background. You don't really talk about the specifics of it that much on the air. How many games a year did you go to? I was a Yankee fan. I somehow sneaked into Game 5 of the '69 World Series, got lucky there. But how many games did you go to, and were they really your life as a kid?
Well, I would say I probably spent at least 500 days and nights in the upper deck at Shea Stadium. I was fortunate enough to be there for Game 3 against the Braves in '69 in Section 48, Row R. Which anybody who knows Shea Stadium knows is the last section, and not quite the top, but pretty close to it. Much better view of the visitors' bullpen than of the field. But I was in the building that day, and I made it down to the field to get my little piece of turf, which I kept for many, many years till my mother moved and it disappeared. But I was 11 years old then. But interestingly enough, I probably went to the most games while I was in college. I was probably at 50 games a year, 50 home games a year. And anybody who knew me in college knows I didn't spend a lot of time studying. I spent most of my time either at the radio station or at Shea Stadium.
WKCR, right? If I'm correct about that. You did soccer with George Stephanopoulos. Little trivia tidbit to throw in here. You're almost a perfect person to go into the Hall of Fame, Gary. Not just because you excel at what you do, but you really are a baton pass. If you think about Met history, it starts with Lindsey Nelson, Ralph Kiner, Bob Murphy, and the fact that you worked with Bob, and you're kind of like a legacy handing off. I wonder if you could talk a little to us about that relationship, and being able to, probably somebody you listened to, if you were at 500 Met games, you probably listened to several thousand where Bob Murphy was actually broadcasting.
Well, that's the thing. I had a relationship with Bob from the time I was 6 years old. He just didn't know it. He was the voice under my pillow. He was the sound of Mets baseball for all of my childhood. And, with Lindsey and Ralph, they created Mets history. I mean, you think about it, Howie and I have built our reputation in part because we know Mets history because we grew up as fans, but those guys didn't have any Mets history. There was no Mets before they took over the reins. And, the three of them handled radio and TV every day. Two of them on TV, one of them on radio. They'd rotate every 3 innings. And those were the only 3 voices associated with the Mets for the first 17 years of the franchise. And I have to tell you that spending 15 years in the booth with Murph, there were very few days that I didn't pinch myself and think, what the heck are you doing here? And, how is this even possible that you're sitting next to Bob Murphy, who you listened to when you were 6 years old under your pillow? So, I think very much so. I think it's an honor to have people come up to me and say, I grew up with Lindsey, Ralph, and Bob, but now you guys are our equivalent of that, and that's just beyond my comprehension.
How about the 2 guys you work with now, Keith and Ron? The camaraderie on air seems fantastic. Now I'm around the clubhouse. You work hard. You're around the clubhouse, and so is Keith, frankly, and Ron. But you and Keith seem very different to me, and yet the rapport on air is fantastic. Was that natural? Was that developed over time? And why do you think it works so well?
I don't really have a great answer for why it works. What I do know is that when we first started, we all really needed to lean on each other. We were all pretty inexperienced when you think about it. I mean, I had never really done much TV, and Ronnie had done 1 year in Washington and really didn't have a whole lot of direction. And Keith had kind of dabbled for a few years, but had never really taken it seriously. And I think that we needed each other. And I think also that despite the fact that, there might be some outsized personalities in that booth, I think that nobody really needs to be the star. We don't need to be on camera. We don't need to dominate the broadcast. Everybody's willing to let everybody else carry the ball, and we genuinely like each other. And I've always felt as though if you're having fun in the booth, then people are having fun watching it. And I hope that comes across.
I like that you described that Keith wasn't taking broadcasting seriously before 2006, as if he's done it since 2006. But obviously I saw a quote. I think you attributed it to Ron Darling, where you described it as freeform jazz. What you guys have, that you do very little planning about what you're going to talk about. You don't script it, etc. I'm just wondering about that experience of the level of trust you have that inning after inning, game after game, there'll be stuff where you guys find the ability and you find the ability to draw out that kind of curmudgeon, hysterical Keith, that analytic, insightful Ron every day.
Well, I think, first of all, it comes down to 2 things. It comes down to having a great producer, which we do. Greg Picker has been with us from day one at SNY. And he knows the game. He's very creative. He gets bored, very frankly, and he likes to push all of us to make sure that we don't just surface analyze things, that we don't be a cliched baseball broadcast, that we go beyond that. So there's that. But I think also there's a certain amount of preparation that goes into every day. And Ronnie and I both prepare meticulously to make sure that we know everything that's going on in the game, and so we can address any issue that comes up. And Keith prepares in his own way. It might be a little bit differently, but he's always ready. And 95% of the stuff you prepare never makes it into the broadcast, but at least you're ready to the great thing about baseball is that it's a game of connections, right? You see something happen and it brings up something that happened the day before or the week before or 6 months before or 10 years before, or something you read about 80 years ago. And I think that as long as you're ready and you have that knowledge base, then you can go in whatever direction you want. And then it's a matter of personalities and how they mesh and who pushes who and where it goes. And I never know where it's going to go. And that's probably a good thing.
We work with Ron here, so we know that he prepares, and I think it's probably good. You have a rarity of having two Ivy Leaguers in the booth, so you do your homework. We have Mark DeRosa here as well, who also prepares very diligently. I wanted to ask you, though, about the switch. I read your bio. I did a little bit of preparation myself, and it said that you were reluctant to come off of radio. How close were you in position where you could have turned them down? I know a lot of the broadcasters are working for the team. I'm not sure how it works with you guys. You're working for SNY, I think, not the team. Could you have turned them down, and how close did you come? And how much different is it for you to do TV instead of radio?
Well, I certainly could have turned them down. I was working for WFAN, and SNY came calling. I was not their first choice. They wanted to hire Dave O'Brien, who had done like 50 games a year on the over-the-air Mets package, but he re-upped with ESPN, and now he's with the Red Sox. They wanted Ted Robinson, who had done Mets games on TV, but they wanted somebody who could basically do all the games, and Ted had other commitments with his tennis. So I think I was the third choice. And by the time they got to me, they had already hired Keith, and they were trying to, figure things out. And I had a lot of soul searching to do because I've always been a radio chauvinist. I tell people now, and it's true, I still think in radio and speak in TV. I probably speak more of a hybrid, probably speak more than most TV guys do. But, I have to filter out all the descriptive phrasing that goes through my head as a radio person. So, so there was a lot that went into that decision, but let's be honest, TV pays a lot more than radio, and I have 5 kids, and they were all heading for college at that point. So it was, at the end of the day, it became a situation where I had a chance to get on the ground floor of something new. The subject matter was known to me, and then it was a matter of figuring out how to talk less and dress better.
Gary, you did mention your radio roots from the question John was asking, and you're going in again, fittingly probably, with Howie Rose into the Mets Hall of Fame. The Mets have essentially had state-of-the-art TV and radio guys for their 6 decades. The people who are doing this, including yourself. I wonder what you think of going in with Howie, and what do you think about Howie as a broadcaster?
Well, I think it's fantastic that we're going in together. As much as I treasured the 15 years I worked with Murph, and as great as these last 18 years have been with Keith and Ron, those 2 years in the middle with Howie in 04 and 05 when we were together on the radio were probably the most fun that I ever had. It was like speaking back and forth to somebody with the same brain. We didn't know each other as kids, but we certainly shared a lot of the experiences and a lot of the sensibilities. And Howie's wonderful. He is the repository of Mets history and Mets lore. People talk to me about how much I know about the Mets, but Howie knows 10 times as much and remembers things in great vivid detail. And he's passionate, and he's a wonderful friend on the radio to everybody who listens. And I'm so happy for him because he deserves this as much as anybody.
Let's not leave out Al Leiter and Howard Johnson also going in. So if you could give me a couple of words on each of them, and also on Jay Horwitz, who's also being honored by the Mets Hall of Fame.
Yeah, Al and Hojo are two of the most delightful people I've ever been around. I mean, there's never been a more intense competitor than Al. And yet, you know, I say this all the time. There are very few pitchers that I've ever been around who, the day that they're going to start, um, welcome conversation. And he would. Most pitchers have their game face on, and you don't go anywhere near them the day they're pitching. Al would have 5 chairs around his locker and be carrying on a rap session. It's just, but then when he got on the mound, he was so emotional into every pitch, and I think that really endeared him to Mets fans. Plus the fact that he was a great pitcher. And Hojo's, first of all, he's just a delightful human being, but more than anything else, in terms of this honor, he's probably the most underrated Met ever. I mean, he had 3 of the best seasons any Met has ever had, and it gets overlooked because they weren't for championship teams. I mean, he played for the '86 championship team, but he was, basically a role player on that team. But after the championship, he was their best player for 5 or 6 years, and I think people forget that sometimes because they didn't necessarily win the years that he was excelling. But there very rarely been switch hitters with the combination of power and speed that Hojo had. He was a terrific player, and I'm glad that he's going in. And that's for Jay. I mean, he's the glue of this franchise for the last 5 decades. I mean, nobody who's come through this organization has anything but happy memories of Jay and his relationship with the players, and the way that he was able to connect the players with the media. And even today, in his role as the alumni director, the way he was able to fashion that Mets Old Timers Day last year was remarkable. And it's great that he's been given the authority to do those things. And Steve and Alex get a lot of credit for honoring Mets history. And Jay has certainly come through in that gig as well. But Jay is everybody has wonderful stories and memories and happy thoughts about Jay, and I'm glad that he's getting honored as well.
Gary, you mentioned Al would regale reporters, announcers before a start. I think David Cohen fell into that rare category also, as somebody who would talk to you before a game. You mentioned Jay being able to connect players. It's a different sport from, it's funny, your first year was 89 radio for the Mets full time. That was my first year covering the Yankees full time before, I rolled it into being a columnist. So we're kind of in that same period. And we've seen access cut. We've seen social media probably make everybody a little more touchy than they've ever been before. What does it mean to the lead broadcaster of the Mets, the way that there's been evolution or revolution in your relationship with players?
Yeah, I don't think it's affected us nearly as much as it's affected the writers. I mean, I don't tweet, and so that takes me out of that realm. I've found Twitter to be actually a great tool for me because I follow all of you guys, and then I know what's going on. I've always been arm's length with the players anyway. I mean, I always have cordial relationships with them, but I don't need a lot from them. And when I do need something, I try to make it brief. I don't have to do in-depth stories or get, too much in the weeds, and I try not to take up too much of their time. So it really hasn't changed a lot for me. I mean, it's different when you go in a clubhouse now and there are 3 players in the clubhouse, and they're all, the rest of them are all in private areas that the media doesn't have access to. But I honestly don't think that's really affected us as much as it's affected others.
Are players touchier? Like, it's just like social media. I mean, for me, I feel like players are more sensitive than in the past. And I'm in issues because I sense that wives, girlfriends, mothers, fathers, friends are informing that they're interpreting it as if I'm writing Sanskrit or something to the player, and it's almost always wrong. And then you're putting out fires. Have you felt over the years that you're putting out fires that maybe you didn't in the 80s, 90s, early aughts?
No, I don't know. I mean, I'm sure I've pissed people off at various stages in my career, and sometimes I hear about it, and sometimes I don't. And sometimes people want to talk about it, and sometimes they just stew. And I the nature of the job is that you say stuff, and the as you say, the families, the girlfriends, they hear it, and then things get back third hand. But none of it is all that important. I do think that players do feel a little more bombarded now because of social media. I think before that it was sports talk radio, right? I mean, Mike and the Mad Dog started the same year that I did, and that's when sports talk radio really took off. And I think that created a little bit of hesitation on players' part, but the social media thing has it's changed everything. It's changed how players have to behave in public. It's changed the openness with which they approach just about everybody, because anybody potentially with a camera or a microphone in their pocket can can cause harm, and that's a shame. It is, and that's true of anybody in the public sphere, not just baseball players.
We'd be remiss if we didn't ask you about this year's team. Obviously, a disappointment at 500 right now with the highest payroll in baseball history. What do you make of this year's team? I mean, could it possibly be like that team with I'm not good with the years, but Coleman and Bonilla? Could it possibly be that again? Or are we going to see a resurgence or what happened last year where they ended up winning 101 games? Or is it something in between?
Well, I don't know. That's why we played the season, so we'll find out. But I do know that going into the season, I was cautioning everybody that this was a very old team, and that certainly has made its mark. With Verlander and Scherzer missing as much time as they have, and Marte and Canna particularly looking older than they did last year. But they've got some dynamic players. Excuse me. I mean, if Scherzer and Verlander are healthy, they are, two top of the rotation guys, much as Scherzer and DeGrom were slated to be last year, and that team won 101 games. Lindor and Alonso and Nimmo and McNeil are a terrific core. And if, Alvarez and Beatty continue to play the way they have, and Vientos and Mauricio can contribute as well, then you have the infusion of youth that makes this team feel a little less brittle. But we've seen it over the last few years. I mean, whether it was the Nationals in 19 or the Braves in 21 or the Phillies in 22, first thirds of seasons for teams in this division are not necessarily indicative of what's going to end up happening in October.
Since you've watched more Mets over the last half century, a little bit more, I guess, than anybody else, I want to ask you, who was your favorite growing up? And now that you've been doing this for 34, 35 years, who's been your favorite player, either to deal with or to watch?
Well, my favorite player growing up was Bud Harrelson. And there's nobody else close to Buddy. He was, the underdog, the little guy. He was so much fun to watch, speed and such incredible grace in the field. And so he was my be all end all, and I wanted to be like him until I realized I had no talent. As far as to cover, there have been a lot of guys. The most fun guys to be around are always the fringe guys. The Tom O'Malley's, the Tim Bogars. Those are the guys you remember as being the Josh Satin. The front and center guys. But as far as on the field, it's hard to get past watching Jose Reyes and David Wright and not feel as though, those guys had just such incredible talent and fun and those teams that they played on together were those were special. And but you know what? They're all special in their own way, right? I mean, everybody who's played for this franchise, and there aren't that many of them when you come right down to it. A few hundred or thousand, whatever. You remember them all in a certain fond way. because they do come and go. And there have been a lot of generations of players filter through here over the 35 years that I've been doing this job.
I think we saw the affinity, the passion, the love that the fan base does have for the players last year with the old timers game. When that came back, it's like the Mets had run away from their history without realizing their fan base actually loves the history, as zigzag and problematic as it's been at times. I'm wondering, as a way to wrap up here, because you are both a broadcaster and an historian, especially of this team. If you were trying to summarize 6+ decades of this franchise, what is it?
Well, it's very easy. It's perpetual failure punctuated by exceptional triumph. That's what this franchise has been. And we were having this discussion the other day, vis-a-vis the Oakland A's and their record this year, and what it would mean if they had a worse record than the 62 Mets. And Howie and I both were of the opinion that as fans, we treasure the 62 Mets because despite the fact that they were 40 and 120, they were beloved. And obviously it's a different experience in Oakland right now, and I'm sure the players for the 62 team, and in fact, Steve Gelbs talked to Ed Kranepool and Jay Hook about it. They would love to see another team, expunge them as the symbol of failure. But you know what? The failures are part of what made the fan base, right? 69 was an incredible accomplishment, but without 62 to 68, it's not as incredible an accomplishment. So, it's the nature of the Mets fan to understand that his team is not always going to be great, but it makes the great moments that much better.
Yeah. The Mets had an excuse in 62. They were an expansion team. I'm not really sure the A's have an excuse except for trying to throw games to get to Las Vegas. But that's my opinion. I'm leaving you out of this, Gary. It's also my opinion that coming Saturday before the Mets play the Blue Jays, that this is incredibly well earned. Anybody who listened to you on radio and TV, I think John and I are kind of different from the average fan, because I know when I turn on, I kind of want to go, oh, that's interesting. Oh, I learned something. And I've got to say, every time I listen to a Met broadcast with you and Ronnie and Gary, I learned something, I said, Gary, Keith, and yourself. So, well earned, well deserved, and I'll speak for John here. I try not to do that. We're both really thankful that you joined us here today, and congratulations on this great honor you're going to be getting on Saturday.
Thank you, guys. It was great of you to have me on, and it's going to be great, and I don't know what it's going to feel like, but it's going to be an incredibly special day. So thank you very much.
All right. Enjoy it. And thank you for joining us on the show with Joel Sherman and John Heyman. Gary Cohen was a great guest, John. Thanks so much, John. But while I was away on the other side of the ocean, John put in a lot of effort to get us a guest this week and got us Gary. Thank you, John, for doing that.
I just want to add, no, it was no problem getting him. He agreed immediately, but thank you for saying it was a lot of effort.
Yeah. Well, you're truthful also. I wonder if we could play our usual game to kind of close up here, hit or error.
I'm going to give a weird error to Las Vegas. They seem to be on track and agreeing to letting the A's come in. I don't understand why. They're clearly one of the next two cities that would get an expansion team, with Nashville being the other city. Wait for an expansion team. I think it'd be great to have your own team. Why bring in the A's, who are en route, I believe? We'll see. I mean, we thought the 2003 Tigers were going to break the 62 Mets record for ineptitude, the 40 win mark that the Mets had in 62. It looks like the A's are going to do it for sure. Why bring that team in there with that owner who seems to be trying to lose? I would say wait. The hockey team is great. You have the Raiders, who are not great, but they love having the Raiders. I know I've been there at a game. So I'm giving a small error to Las Vegas for diving in on the Oakland A's.
They're really going to impact the playoff race. I wonder how close to 39-0 Seattle, Texas, and Houston go against Oakland this year. And, we talked about earlier in the show how competitive the American League East is, though they're playing 6 games against Oakland, and you wonder if some playoff spots are going to be determined. If I was playing hit or error, I guess I would say, is there an error against hits? I think we expected with the fewer shifts this year that we'd see more singles in particular. They're flat. They're almost exactly the same as last year. Batting average is up slightly, 243 to 248. Run scoring's up a little. Obviously, stolen bases are up a little. But essentially, the 3 true outcomes are also up. Home runs, walks, and strikeouts. I think we got the main thing we wanted, which was let's play. And we're now in this regular cycle of 2-hour 30, 2-hour 40-minute games, which feels much better about how we're playing. I still think the game itself that we've watched for a third of the season, and I don't know how we change this with the velocity and movement of pitching these days, but it's very much the game we've been watching with a few more stolen bases.
Yeah, the pitch clock has made the biggest difference so far. The stolen bases are nice, but thank God for the pitch clock. That is the greatest innovation. I don't want to say in baseball history. That'll be overstating it, but it's
Oh, John, overstayed. You're fine.
Well, for us with deadlines, it's big. But even with people without deadlines, it's a plus.
John, I'm going to have a deadline tonight as we're speaking. I'm going to Mets and Phillies. So we got to jump out of here. So this is the moment where I thank everybody for listening to the show, a podcast from the New York Post, where I thank our producers every week for helping us get through this, Jake Brown and Andrew Hartz. Don't forget that this show drops on the Yes app by Wednesday noon every week. Take a view of that. Don't forget to subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And please give us a 5-star rating. And let's see who John comes up with for a guest next week. I'm putting a lot of pressure on you again, John. I'm abstaining as the talent corral guy. We'll see who you come up with next week. So please stick with us on the show with Joel Sherman and John Heyman.